and then says to him, "What time do you get up tomorrow?" 7 o'clock. "Oh, come on there and I'll play with you then."
Faith at the Fringe, a Sanctuary First podcast series. Uncovering God in the creative arts. At the biggest international arts festival in the world, Sanctuary First stops to ask, where does faith and art meet?
Welcome to Faith at the Fringe, a Sanctuary First podcast series engaging with artists, creatives and musicians who are performing at the Fringe and seeking to explore with them where their faith and the Fringe meet together. Today we are in our lovely podcast studio by courtesy of St Cuthbert's Parish Church, and in the background you might even be able to hear the tones of the pipe organ, all part of the ethos of our new podcast studio, to give us a sense of just being part of a very historic building, which in fact is the oldest Christian heritage site in Edinburgh. So with that introduction, I now want to welcome our guest today, who is Michael Taylor of the Searchlight Theatre Company, and he's involved in taking a lead role in the play entitled Chariots. So let's just now have a moment to welcome you, Michael. Thank you for being with us today. And I'm looking forward to having a chance to talk with you about this whole this play that you've got going.
To it, Albert.
Good. So here, the question I'm asking is, Chariots of Fire was such a brilliant film. Everybody knows the story. So what extra can the play bring to that whole story of Eric Liddell?
Well, Chariots of Fire, made in 1981, won an Oscar for, I think, Best Adapted Screenplay or Best Original Screenplay. It was indeed an Oscar winner. And famously, one of the producers was Mohammed Al-Fayed, who was the owner of Harrods at the time. And very, very successful, telling the story of Eric Liddell, who indeed we dramatise here in our play, and an athlete at Cambridge University called Harold Abrahams. Both of them were 100-metre runners, sprinters, and it charts the journeys that they're on in their life. Abraham's overcoming the anti-Semitism of the time and the fight against professionalism within sport, and his desire to better himself and to be better by bringing in a trainer called Sam Musabini, who helps him to improve his running, changing his stride length, and it was his drive and desire to be this sort of running machine that he wanted to be. And we see his journey play out in the film alongside Eric Liddell. So with Eric, we meet him in Edinburgh at a mission, and his family talking to him about the challenges that he's facing in wanting to be a missionary, but also wanting to run. He was at Edinburgh University and was a very, very gifted sportsman at that time. He played rugby for Scotland out on the wing, very, very fast, but his sprinting was there, and he was very, very good. And so the film takes this journey with principally getting to the point where Eric Liddell finds out that the heats for the 100 metres final are to be on a Sunday. And he feels this immediate challenge within himself to say, well, what are we going to do here? Because my faith would say that I need to rest on the Sabbath, and so I can't do it. And thus the film takes this journey of what Eric Liddell did, or indeed didn't do, and explores a lot more of, I suppose, of who Harold Abrahams was. And our play gets the chance to really do both with Eric, just focusing in on what he did and didn't do, running on the Sabbath, but also gets to peel back a little bit of who he was.
Of his character and his nature. Okay. Of course, one of the things I'm interested in is that he was a man of great principle.
Oh,
you
yes.
know, so here he is, he believes it's wrong for him to run on a Sabbath. And yet, the question is, in today's world and how the Christian church looks at things, often churches will actually close or change the times of their service on a Sunday to allow the London Marathon to run.
Yeah.
So was Liddell wrong? Did he get it wrong?
I think I think Eric Liddell gets a lot more right, frankly, than he gets wrong with the way that he lives out his faith. Looking at it almost exactly 100 years on from when he was making those decisions and doing these things, the specialness of Sunday, that reverence and respect that was the protection, that scaffolding that was around 6 days of the week being where we do our work, and one day where we stop and we remember God, where we stop and we rest. We have obviously lost that as a society by some way, especially within the last, well, it's my lifetime, end of the 90s would be when the law changed for Sunday trading. And which is to say that early in my childhood, going to the shops on a Sunday wasn't something you could do. But now is a distant memory for people of any faith or no faith whatsoever. Well, yeah, Sunday is just another day. And even the 10 till 4 that's there for the shops being open, I don't think we ever stop and really think, why is it that Tesco's is kicking us out at 4 o'clock? But I think he had a lot more right than wrong, yeah.
Was it the competing that was wrong? Or was it running on a Sunday that was wrong? Or was it because on this occasion there was a commercialisation of sport beginning to happen? So here's a question. I mean, are you saying then that a kid shouldn't go out on a Sunday afternoon and play football as an amateur and enjoy that game? Or
well, it's a famous scene in the film where indeed there is a kid as he comes out from church who's kicking a ball, and he says, "Do you know what day it is today? It's Sunday. It's not a day for kicking a football, is it?" And then says to him, "What time do you get up tomorrow?" 7 o'clock. "Oh, come on there and I'll play with you then." Right. And there's this desire to point, not wanting to paint God as a spoil sport, but I think wanting to acknowledge that we do have space.
It's making God a bit of a spoil sport to a kid there. Let's be honest here. It's Sunday. What is the sin? What kind of God is going to be angry at seeing a kid enjoying themselves, running for the pleasure that he made him for? And in fact, Liddell says this: I run for his pleasure, or I get pleasure when I'm running for God. So is that not what we are called to do in worship? Is to worship? Our worship is an offering to God in thanksgiving for all we have. So then here's a question: then, is it wrong to play the guitar on a Sunday? Is it wrong to play we hear the church organ at the back? Is it wrong to pay the church organist who's playing the worship songs on a Sunday?
Well, we can see this play out in Israel today. They will, on the Jewish Sabbath, they will have in hotels the lift buttons will not work. The lifts will stop on every single floor, and they'll do that lest any Jews that strictly observe the Shabbat, as they would call it, would consider pressing the button of a lift work. And so there are some hotels where indeed you cannot even press a lift button, and obviously the Jewish observance of the Sabbath is the kind of the gold standard, of which Eric Liddell kind of calls a little bit underneath that for not that level of adherence, not that level of zealousness. I mean, I would say some of this is that's where I said about the fact that I think Liddell got more right than he got wrong. I grew up playing football on a Sunday, but it was in the afternoon with my dad, and so we would play together as a family. But I didn't grow up playing football on a Sunday morning when the football leagues were at that time. So for all the young lads growing up, Sunday football was something that happened on a morning, and my mum and dad made it abundantly clear to me in no uncertain terms that, yes, Sunday morning we would be at church as a family. And I would say perhaps I would maybe have encouraged Eric to have just taken 10 seconds out of his Sunday morning, just that 10.5 seconds that it would have taken just to, just to have a quick sprint down the 100-meter cinder track. But you have to admire the fact that, well, no, this was just not even a question of. It wasn't even a question for him. No, the Sabbath is not when we work, and we won't.
You remind me of when I was a kid. I must have been about 7 or 8, and my parents were at church on a Sunday evening, and I was with Granny, and it was so boring, you know. And there was no television. You weren't allowed to watch television. You wouldn't listen to the radio.
No,
it was
of course.
Because it was a strict understanding of Sabbath. I remember on a Sunday night I had some money, and years ago there used to be what they called chewing gum machines that were on the newsagents outside the newsagent. And I remember I had some money, and Granny wasn't looking, and I slipped out of the house and ran down to the newsagents and put the penny in the machine or whatever it was and got a packet of chewing gum. Of course, Granny discovered I had chewing gum. She says, "Did you buy that on a Sunday?" And I said, "No, I didn't," because nobody was working. You see, the reason why you don't buy anything on a Sunday is you're causing someone else to work,
Yes.
and therefore they should be resting. But the machine isn't working. So it was all right. And I remember my granny looking at me and saying, "You're too clever by half."
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of, I heard recently the radio DJ Chris Evans talks about his family time on a Sunday, where I believe that they have their phones, all of the family's phones, he's got older children, are put to one side for the day, or at least for portions of it, I can't be fully certain, to go, we're going to not have our phones today. Because the danger is that we'll just be on our phone. It'll just be another day where we're on our phones. And actually, those principles, those practices of just being able to set aside time and make it different for the Sunday or for the Sabbath, depending if you're having to observe it on a different day, which, that's life. Some people have to work on a Sunday, and it's like, well, my Sabbath is on a Wednesday or a Friday. But it's making sure that is different. And I think the lesson from Liddell is one that we need to be continually reminded of, because we have so lost the specialness and the preciousness of what God put in that Genesis text for us, that there is Adam and Eve, a day old within that narrative, and it's like they wake up the next morning and it's like, well, God, here we are, ready to go. What's happening? I'm sure, we've got great things ahead of us today. What is it? We're going to rest today. But we're not even tired. No, this isn't about you. You weren't here for any of the making of this world. I did it all, and you'll notice you weren't around to help me on 1, 2, 3, and 4,
Of course,
and 5.
the question I would like to then ask God is, so what did you do when you were resting, God?
Well, I think this is it. I think God's content to sit
God
with him.
not do nothing?
Well, I think Pascal talks about the problems of the world being mostly caused by mankind being unable to just sit still in a room. I'm slightly sort of bastardizing his phrase there, but Pascal, the great sort of philosopher, if only a man could just sit quietly in a room by himself with his thoughts, and maybe we wouldn't have so many things in the world. But we do, as a species, seem to struggle to be able to just sit still.
Well, let's get back to Liddell again and to the story, because we've been looking at the morality of Sunday, and we've kicked that around a little bit. We could go further in it, but the other thing is, you were saying that the play goes on to uncover more about the man Liddell. So it's something about his devotion to God and his call to be a missionary in China? Yes,
I think there was this obviously high principle gene or within him, or this high principle calling from God, depending on how you wish to look at it. But there was something within him that wanted to give in his life in service to God, and to give his best and to give his all in that sense for whatever he did. And that applied to his sport and to his studies when he was studying. But there was really just a transference of that post the Olympics, where, I will say, spoiler alert, he won. He was able to just take that mindset, to take that principle and just apply it into the mission field in China, where he would serve for another 20 years. And we get to see some of that drive within him, but also get to explore some of the challenges that he faces for helping other people around him understand it. So we have Eric's trainer, played by my good friend David Robinson, who isn't a Christian, but is helping to sort of train him, not as in a professional context like in the film with Sammy Sabini. He's an amateur trainer, but he's there with Eric. But that it's struggling to come to terms with all the work that he's seen Eric do and how that is going to play out. And he's concerned for him that goes, well, how is this going to work? Your 100 is your main event. The 400 is a different kind of race. You can't just sprint it. You've got things to think about. There's the bends. You can't, and it's longer for a start. And so we get to see some of what the impact that he had on those that are around him as well, for both the decision and his life, but ultimately that admiration for a man of faith, where at the end of his life, Eric would be in China when the Japanese invaded in the Second World War, and would be taken to a prisoner of war camp and kept under very severe conditions. And in that place, there was a man who would ultimately write about his experience of being alongside Liddell by saying, it's not often that you get to meet a saint in your life. Wow. But with Eric Liddell, I came pretty close. And this was a man who did not profess faith. Obviously, being in a Japanese prisoner of war camp was an experience of horrific nature. But even he was able to recognize there was something different. There was something about Eric Liddell that carried something of the presence of God in how he held himself. And I will say, in that prisoner of war camp, apparently, Eric Liddell did referee a hockey match on a Sunday, which, I mean, big news. It was said that happened, which is But in the end, he ultimately had a brain tumor that he was aware meant that he would not be surviving. And so even though Winston Churchill had been able to negotiate with the Japanese a reprieve to get Eric out of the jail, he knew that he wouldn't need it. And so he gave his space to someone else, and another man was let free in his place. What a man.
Wow, that's a wonderful story, isn't it? But I think what we're learning from all of this is the importance of a Christian life, being willing to offer to God something that's costly. I mean, for Liddell, perhaps this running was more a personal thing for him. That you know that bit in the Bible where David is offered I think it's David that's offered a sacrifice. The bulls to sacrifice, but they're not his. But right. You can make.
Yes.
And David says, "I will not offer to the Lord that which costs me nothing."
No.
And so it's a bit like, when you go into church on a Sunday and you've not got any collection, and somebody says to you, "Oh, there's a couple of pounds you can put in the plate." But it's not really your offering, it's somebody else's offering. So Liddell was looking at his own life at this time and was being challenged perhaps by saying, Christ must come first.
Yeah, I mean, David's narrative in the Bible is found in 1 Samuel, and 1 Samuel is famously provides the verse that's given to Eric before he runs the 400 meters. He who honors me, I will honor. And I was at the Eric Liddell Centre, which is just down in Morningside, a few years ago, and I had the opportunity to actually hold the vase that was given to Eric as part of the medal ceremony, and it was quite a special moment. But they said, the chief exec of the Liddell Association said that verse really summed up Eric's life. He who honours me, I will honour. That underpins, sort of undergirds, if you will, his entire approach. That yes, he wanted to honour God above all else. It's what he wanted to do. The sacrifice that he would bring would be his own, yes, and ultimately, yes, he would offer his entire life to God. But I think that sense of honouring is something that, again, we need to be reminded of. This is where the stories of the heroes of faith that we have in the canon of both Scripture and of the last 2,000 years, they're important stories to tell because they can remind us of important truths that maybe we lose focus on in the busyness of life, or just in a culture that doesn't really give time and space for words such as honour.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite hard in our culture today for people to quite understand Liddell and to understand why would he do this when so much sport is on television on a Sunday, when everything is Sunday is just like any other day. the temptation. It is just such a challenge for us to think about that. But what we are saying and what you're saying is, it's got to go deeper than that. Don't let that put you off. Look again at your own life, perhaps. But is this what's coming? Because when we watch these plays and watch things, we're challenged to say, what would I do if I was in that situation? I would, and so there's a sense in which I guess your play is saying to people, so what is it? What's the costly thing that maybe you have to offer to God?
Yeah. And well, it's seeing that in laying down that sacrifice and laying down what he wanted to do, which would have been to run the 100 meters, to race against Harold Abrahams and have the ultimate test of the Olympic final, to be able to determine once and for all who would the fastest man on earth be. And that's something that still resonates today. We can all think of that mantle of the fastest man on earth. We think of Usain Bolt now, but before that, the Linford Christies and the Carl Lewises of the world, we can appreciate what it means now to be the fastest man on the planet. But he put that aside. But in running the 400 meters, they're out in lane 8, the worst lane, other than perhaps lane 1, depending on how you wish to look at it. But there he was in lane 8. And he not only won an Olympic gold medal, he broke the world record in lane 8 for an event that wasn't necessarily his best one either. And it's the fact that in laying down for that
hair on your head stand.
Well, that's it, isn't it? It's the fact he ran it and he sprinted it. He sprinted. He did his first 200 meters in 21.8 seconds, which is a very good 200 meter time. Which meant that he did the second 200 in about 26 seconds. But and that is not even how you're supposed to run the 400 meters. You're supposed to run the first half a bit slower, make sure that you've got enough in the tank to get you around. But he just ran it, and he ran it in lane 8 there, and came home with an Olympic gold medal. And it was a stunning achievement to have seen it. And admittedly, the film and even our play does bring that cancellation of the 100 a little bit closer to the event. He had, in reality, had a couple of months. The schedule had come out a couple of months beforehand, and so he had a bit of time, about a couple of months, to prepare himself for focusing in on the 4 than the 1. But to be in that position, there is no athlete today. Perhaps Michael Johnson, who was a very, very brilliant 200 and 400 meter. He was asked to run the 100, but never did, and indeed held the world records for 2 and 4, but never went and even tried to do the 100. But be in the position where Eric Liddell absolutely could have won the gold medal. The last time he raced Harold Abrahams, he beat Harold Abrahams, and then the next race should have been at the Olympic final, and they never had the chance to meet. But to be able to be in the position where you could have a gold medal in the 1, which he could have legitimately had, and then the 400 meters is absurd. And I think talks of the way that God honored him and brought about something miraculous.
It reminds me of that famous quote from Eliot. And he said, he is no fool who gives up that which he can't keep to gain that which he can't lose.
Yes.
And there is something in all of this. This is such an inspiration to hear you speak, and I can see that you've really engaged with Liddell, and he's a bit of a hero and a role model for you to begin to be encouraged by.
Yeah, he's been a companion since 2012 for me. It's when we first did the show in the run-up to the Olympics of 2012 in London, and we took out the show in 2012, 13 and 14, and then brought him back last year, and indeed we'll be taking him out again next year, because it is going to be the 1924 Paris Olympics centenary, and that will be marked by Paris having the Olympic Games themselves into 100 years on. So we wanted to start the process of just bringing the show back round and into repertoire.
It would be great if you could actually take the show and do it in Paris, in the Church of Scotland. The Church of Scotland.
It would be wonderful, and maybe perform it on a Sunday, as we have many, many times now. I will say this is perhaps the most amusing part of the production. The amount of times that we have performed the show on a Sunday is quite something, and no church has ever sought to go, actually, maybe we should put you on the Saturday or we'll put you on the Monday. But indeed, we have performed it at many churches over the years, but always on a Sunday. But it would be lovely to perform it, in Paris. But we're hopeful that more churches will look to sort of use us in 2024 as a way.
Well, in actual fact, the interesting thing is I have had an invitation to go to be in Paris next year to do some locum work in the Church of Scotland in Paris. It's just off the Champs-Élysées, the Church of Scotland.
Eric spoke there, indeed, on the Sunday morning.
It's a different church now because it's been all modernised. But it might be interesting to... You've heard it here first. It could be that...
I'll start packing now.
Packing now, yeah. But the thing is, I think from all of this, what I'm learning and what I'm thinking, I'm drawing from all this is... It's not so much about the Sunday. It's about what you're willing to not withhold to give to God.
Yeah.
So what will you say, God, you can have everything, but no further?
Well, I mean, there's the oxymoron of most people's Christian walk. God, you can have everything. Within reason. No, you can have I surrender all to a limit. Well, it's like, we don't mean it, most of us. We want to mean it. We do. There's that part of us that wants to give back to God, that wants to please, but we always seemingly want to also hold on to that control. We want to hold on to hang on. Well, yes, Jesus says, don't worry about what it is to, the lilies in the field are dressed, so you don't worry about what to dress yourself in. And yet, and I'm sure that's why no Christians have ever been, found in Primark or other clothing shops are available. We do worry about what we're going to wear and what we're going to eat tomorrow. But the reminder from Jesus is, but don't let it do that. Don't. And it goes, and God is gracious with us, which is good because he needs to be, because we do trying to pull back. And I think the trick for us, walking out our faith is to be able to recognize and just be able to be honest with ourselves, honest with God, frankly, honest with each other, to be able to say, well, actually, I surrender some is a much better thing to say than I surrender all, given that it's true. It's much, much better to say that than to stand piously and, I've given God everything. Well, you haven't. Well, you're right, I haven't. Yes, I know. So don't. Let's not fall into the trap of that. But then, don't let that then be a full stop. Make that a comma to then continue on. I surrender some, and I want to surrender more. Yeah. And let that be a progress, a journey that we're on.
I've often said that to people. Sometimes when somebody will come to me, a Christian family or someone will come and say to me, look, we want to tithe, but we've got so many other commitments. How do we do it? And one way I've suggested to people is, well, make a start and work up to the tithe, if that's what you've got to do, because you've got to honour your bills and you've got to pay certain things, but don't take on extra and begin to readjust things so that you can be there. Yeah. And that's the way forward. But listen, Michael, it's been great talking to you. I think, I hope many people get lots out of this podcast and find it helpful. What we need to do now is tell us, you've got me excited that I really don't want to miss this play. So when and where will we see it?
We are at Venue 254, Palmerston Place, Wednesday the 23rd through to Saturday the 26th. So we have got shows at 7:15, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and matinee on the Saturday. So week 3 of the Fringe, we will be bringing 5 performances of this, just 5. So run for a ticket. But yeah, Venue 254, Palmerston Place Church.
That sounds absolutely wonderful.
Details are on our website, so that's www.searchlighttheatre.org. And if you'd like to see us in the Screwtape Letters or Titanic, The Last Hero and the Last Coward, which is at Venue 320, which is Charlotte Chapel, just around the corner. We've got a few performances of that happening in advance of that. And if you go onto our website, you can buy a pass that will allow you to see all of the shows for just £20.
That's a bargain.
That's a bargain indeed.
Indeed. Listen, thank you so much for being with us today, and we're looking forward to hopefully being able to promote what you're doing and for us all to go and think more about what it means to be willing to give and not count the cost, or be aware of the cost, but being aware of the cost, offering it as an offering to God. So thank you as we leave you from our podcast studio, and the sounds of the organ, if you're straining, you can hear them taking us out, and hopefully we'll catch up with you next time for our next podcast, which is going to be about street pastors at the Fringe.